This is Jane. She wants to take the birth control pill. But the ease of that depends on where she lives. In Armenia, she can just walk into a pharmacy and buy it. In France, the pill is subsidized, but she still needs a prescription. While in Austria, she would have to pay for the pill herself. The truth is, access to contraception in Europe varies depending on where you live and who you are. But wind the clock back a few decades, and it was much harder to get. The contraceptive pill has been around since the 1960s, but its availability has often been restricted.
When it became more available on the NHS and there were contraceptive clinics, you had to then go through a questionnaire about who you were engaged to.
This is Derry Roberts. She had a liberal lifestyle in the 1960s, and she had to lie to get the pill.
Well, the problem with that is you couldn't remember the names of people, and you were sitting there with your ring from Woolworths thinking, they're writing this down and I'm not going to remember that in 6 months' time, or maybe I'd change the story. It was a bit silly, but it had to be done, and they weren't allowed to give it to you unless they felt you were in a stable relationship.
The pill was a game changer for women, as the alternative was unwanted children, adoption, or backstreet abortions, which were both dangerous and illegal. Before the pill, in most of Eastern Europe, legal abortion was often used as a method of birth control.
Abortion was not so much stigmatized and tabooed like nowadays. It was seen as a backup method when other kinds of contraception failed, or for some women it was the main method of birth control because it was free of charge, and for contraception you have to pay it out of pocket. And so we had high rates of abortions, and they were seen as a popular method of birth control.
Today, people have many different forms of birth control they can choose from, including the IUD, the patch, the injection, or even the morning after pill. But Eastern Europe has not embraced these advances in contraception, imposing restrictions and financial constraints.
Women's access to contraception remains very uneven across Europe, and it really is a postcode lottery. So depending on where you're born, you can have easier or more restricted access to contraception. So if you're born in Western Europe, you have relatively easy access to contraception. You turn to the East, and there you have greater restrictions. Some of them are formal restrictions by governments, such as in Poland, and some others are the result of simply that contraception is not financially accessible, in that they are too expensive in relation to people's income.
In some countries, emergency contraception, like the morning after pill, requires a prescription, making it unavailable to many. Birth control can dramatically affect a person's quality of life. Without the arrival of birth control, the lives of women would have been very different.
It's important because, first of all, it's sort of the cornerstone of women's rights. The ability for women to decide when and how and with whom to have a family or a child is fundamental for how it is that she will chart her own destiny, whether professional, educational, personal, etc. So that's a cornerstone of her own personal empowerment.
Every month you'd be counting the days and thinking, 2 days late panic. You did risk an awful lot. Because remember, it was sex, drugs and rock and roll. No, I wouldn't have felt happy. There's some very wild people out there in those days, you know.